this is Matt Markin, and welcome back to the Adventures in Advising podcast. Along with me on this ride, co-hosting is Ryan Shekel. Ryan, are you excited for today's guests?
Yeah, absolutely. When we have a chance to talk about human intelligence, maybe today, and maybe less artificial. No, I'm always excited when there's a new publication in the body of literature, and thrilled to get to talk about that today with Lisa and Ashley.
Yeah, so we are kind of changing up slightly the episode topic, as we are getting to learn more about an upcoming book release, and that's with two amazing guests, and they are Dr. Lisa Rubin, professor in the College of Education at Kansas State University, and Dr. Ashley Thomas, assistant director of resources and managing editor over at NACADA. Lisa and Ashley, welcome, friends.
Thank you. Welcome to Ashley to be next to me. I'm so glad to have Dr. Thomas nearby.
Oh, it's good to see you both. Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
And so, Lisa, I know, we're going to be talking about this upcoming book called Ethical Issues in Academic Advising. But before we get to that, it's the Adventures in Advising podcast. So we got to know from you and also from Ashley, we got to know about your journeys in higher ed. What's your origin stories?
I don't think I have a typical path, but maybe most of us don't. I fell into higher ed because I followed my brother's footsteps to be an admissions student worker and tour guide at the University of Texas. And my brother still works in enrollment management today, many decades later. So it's his fault. But I started my career after I got my master's as an athletic advisor at the University of Nebraska. And it was a really great place to be. It still has the most academic All-Americans. And I just had a lot of great resources there in terms of mentoring and, of course, facilities and investment in what students' resources were in the athletic department. And so from there, I took a similar position at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I worked as an athletic academic advisor and what we used to call life skills coordinator. Now, student athlete development is that term. And worked in that area while starting my PhD, one class at a time in higher education leadership. And maybe some people remember back in the 2010 timeframe, a lot of budget cuts happening across different states in the US for higher education. And so my PhD program got eliminated while I was finishing it. And that led me to leave athletics to go back to school full time, which was a big change to go from staff to student. And in that time, I picked up some graduate assistantships in different areas, academic integrity and student conduct, and student organizations and involvement. And I adjuncted teaching first-year experience courses at all three colleges in the Southern Nevada area, making ends meet with lots of different jobs until I was able to get a full-time position as a career advisor in the Hospitality Management College, which is #1 in the world. I believe still is. So I got to be around students from all over the country and all sorts of countries that wanted to work in the field of hospitality. And that was a very rewarding time. So after serving as a career advisor for 3 years, finishing my PhD and adjuncting all the time, I ended up in my dream job at Kansas State University, where I've been for 11 years teaching both in academic advising and student affairs and higher ed programs. And so now I consider myself a faculty advisor and a student organization advisor. So I've done what I think is 4 different advising roles, and I've been very rewarded in all of them.
Thank you. Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, so much like Lisa, I definitely kind of stumbled into higher ed. I was working at a mental health center, a community mental health center, as a child adolescent case manager, and got notified about a advisor position at the local community college. And I was like, well, I really enjoyed college. Let me go see what this is all about. And so I was fortunate enough to get my first job at Allen Community College in small town, Southeast Kansas. Was there for 4 years and completed my master's degree in community counseling because the thought was I would take over for my boss when he retired because he was a counselor and the counselor for the college. And then I had a friend who had recently transitioned to K-State as an instructor, and I had kind of guided her through learning how to do advising while she was with me at Allen, and she had moved to K-State, and she said, we have a job open. You need to come do that here. And so I, again, was fortunate. K-State is my alma mater. And so it was really exciting for me to go back home to be a Wildcat again. And so I transitioned to K-State, worked my way up in our office in the College of Business at K-State, was senior advisor. And then felt like I wanted a new challenge, and the position at NACADA came open, and I have been here since 2019 and oversee all NACADA publications, in addition to doing some consulting work, some task forces that we're working on, like the definition of advising, all of those really exciting things. So I did, as Lisa mentioned, I just finished my PhD in January, just graduated. Was it been 2 weekends yet ago? So that was exciting. I worked on my PhD for 11 years, had the joy of having Lisa on my committee, among other kind of NACADA people and celebrities. And so I'm very fortunate that I had an amazing experience with my PhD, and I'm kind of sad that it's over, to be honest. Not many people can say that, but yeah, so I'm really excited to talk about this new book that Lisa has put out, because it's going to be a really important resource for our profession.
Yeah, and speaking of the book, can you tell us a little bit, Lisa, about the inspiration behind the book itself, the title, Ethical Issues in Academic Advising, sort of where this came from?
Absolutely. So when we were putting together the PhD in Leadership and Academic Advising curriculum, which now feels like a lifetime ago, we did a lot of focus groups with former students who had completed our master's in academic advising at various NACADA regional and annual conferences and on Zoom. And this topic came up as something that people wanted, but wasn't in the current curriculum at the graduate level. And we were having conversations with our faculty, which included Charlie Nutt and Wendy Troxel and Sean Bridgen and Karen Sullivan Vance, and a lot of executive office members at the time for NACADA. And there were technically 4 courses, 3 advising specific content courses and an advising research course that we were putting together. And everyone took one of them to work on. And I took the Ethical Issues and Practice of Academic Advising course and put together a potential curriculum, reading lots and lots of books on ethics from different areas of higher education and philosophy and other areas, but nothing was quite in the realm of academic advising. But we have a ton of great articles and both empirical and commentary articles on ethical issues from a lot of outstanding advising scholar practitioners and scholars through NACADA and the Mentor and some other areas. So I put together a course syllabus and potential reading list, and then 5 years goes by and it's time to teach the first section. So that meant, of course, re-updating all of that stuff, looking for new work, which there had been since I had started this process, and then teaching the first course in 2022. And that was with our first cohort of the PhD program. By the end of the cohort, the students, even in my teaching evaluation, said, this course needs to be a book. We would use it to train our staff. This would be really helpful for the profession. So I took their inspiration and put together a book proposal in 2022. And then I had the chance to submit it to the publications advisory board. And the rest, I guess, is history.
The rest is ethics, is what I think it is.
Also true.
Well, so it started with his graduate student sort of experience or whatever, and they saw the value in it. But who do you see as the intended audience for the book, and what do you hope people take away from reading it?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You know, they say teaching is the mother of all professions, but right now it feels like it's happening inside a pressure cooker. That's why we created Higher Listenings, bringing a dose of joy to the future of learning. We're exploring things like why reading may not be obsolete after all, the remarkable connection between emotion and learning, and the real reason students cheat.
It's not a moral failing. It's the circumstances that they find themselves in.
Join us in Higher Listenings, because those who can make a difference teach.
That's a great question. So I have a good number of potential audience members here. I do think probably first and foremost, primary role academic advisors. They're faced with ethical challenges pretty much every day, and they have to make difficult decisions. So that's one group that I think would really benefit from the book. Another are faculty advisors. Since I am one, I know that a lot of faculty advisors do not receive lots of training for their position as it relates to advising anyway. But there's often different types of conflicts that faculty advisors face, sometimes between the curriculum and policies and how they believe students should pursue their paths, which would benefit the students the best, but goes against, maybe the culture of the department or program that the students are in. I also think advising administrators and department heads who supervise advising or oversee their training would be really important to have their engagement with this book. Future leaders in higher education, such as graduate students in higher ed, student affairs, and advising programs, who should have some ethical foundations for their practice as they advance. I also think it would help academic advising scholars, which is probably the majority of the people that I think who would read this, because it's additional base of literature as they build on it for their research. And then lastly, ethics and higher ed researchers, just to contribute another layer of knowledge in the complexity of higher education ethics and how those issues are situated.
So wide range of different individuals that might find benefit in this book. And I guess kind of building upon that, when we're talking about ethics, like, how would you define ethics in the context, of academic advising? And I guess a second part to that could be, what, you're mentioning about ethical advising. What could be some of those ways that ethical advising practices could influence maybe the broader student success or even institutional integrity?
Great questions, Matt. So first, ethics are just basically guidelines for what is considered right and wrong for an individual or a group. And like I said, advisors and people generally make thousands of decisions every day, and our decisions impact people besides us. And so for how ethics matter to advisors, when we're faced with ethical dilemmas, we might have multiple opportunities or multiple options to decide between multiple right answers. So there may not be a wrong one, but how do we distinguish between different options for the best outcome? And so having ethical decision making will help advisors choose between those different options. And some of those options might be something familiar, like a best practice that they've learned through NACADA or through their training and development. And so what ways, you said the second question, what ways can these practices influence student success? So like I said, decisions can impact more than just the advisor and the student that are making them. So one example might be if an advisor is making an exception to a policy for one student, that might lead to other students then asking for exceptions. And that could lead to potential values conflict for an advisor who's loyal to both the institution and the student. And so how do they handle that? An example that I think comes up a lot for us is a student who wants to transfer because they want to pursue an academic program that our institution does not have. And is the advisor harming their institution by supporting the student to transfer? Probably many of us would say no, but if retention has really been beaten down everyone's throats, you must retain students, then telling a student to transfer is not a great look for that person. So that's something that they have to wrestle with. So some things to think about are that advisors are role models or moral mentors for students, and they're exhibiting behavior that students observe. So one example that I think would be interesting to consider is cultural backgrounds of students. So sometimes advisors may strongly believe that a student needs to develop their identity as an adult because they're in college, so they should learn how to make their own academic decisions. And figure things out on their own with the information that's given to them or provided to them with the advising help. But a student may want to bring their parents or family members to an appointment because that's part of their culture. They're in a collectivistic culture and everything they do is influenced by their family member. So how does an advisor who believes that having family members in their meeting or their advising appointment would go against the student's growth and development while respecting their culture? So these are the kinds of things that are in the book to help students and advisors in those unusual situations that do happen all of the time.
Well, I'm kind of curious. I'm going to throw a question to Ashley. There are other publications, other books from NACADA that include ethics components, oftentimes at the beginnings. And I'm kind of curious how you see this book fitting in with the larger body of knowledge and the scope of the literature, just from your perspective with the association and then the role that you play there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So at NACADA, we're always trying to build on what is out there because we all know that the profession is relatively new, right? Like we've been around, advisors have been around for a while, but the profession is constantly changing and evolving. And so we are, with our resources and our publications, we're always trying to keep up with that and make sure that what we're putting out is helpful and timely and useful to the profession while all, and what's happening right now, but also what can we kind of, if we had a crystal ball, what could we predict, right, to happen in the future? Wouldn't that be nice? But so with, as far as this book is concerned, I think it definitely expands, kind of like Lisa mentioned, it expands upon some of the literature that was out there that just started to scratch the surface. And so there's some great articles out there by some authors in the NACADA Journal and things like that. But this really does a deep dive. And when we look at some of the other events that we provide, the resources that we provide, the ethics, I think there's a real appetite for ethics out there because, when we look at our events, like our conferences and things like that, the ethics presentations are always highly attended. And so people are really interested in this area because we, like Lisa said, we always are looking for ways to understand how to navigate certain situations that we're all put into. And so I think that, and even Lisa had some reservations about writing this book, right? This is a massive topic to take on. But my encouragement and my empowerment to her was we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere and putting it down. And maybe, things evolve and change and we expect that. But this book is I think the first of a very needed resource for our profession. And how cool would it be if it leads eventually to a code of ethics or something like that, right? And so those are some of the things that we're always forward thinking on and trying to think about, how do we kind of scaffold some of these things and build things into the future?
Yeah, no, I think this is a great segue into this next question. And, Lisa was talking about, there being the literature out there, conferences, there's a course, and that kind of led into like, well, shouldn't you write a book about this in terms of, when you're structuring something like this and this book taking shape with everything that has to go along with ethics, how do you decide what you include, what you don't include in this? Talk to us about this pathway of this becoming a reality.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's definitely hard to tackle everything. And I know, just to be clear with everyone, this book was peer reviewed. After I wrote it, I got feedback from reviewers and, someone said, this is kind of basic. And I thought, as Ashley said, we do have to start somewhere. And I don't know about anyone else, but I didn't take these types of classes until I was in my PhD program. And I certainly don't expect everyone to have done a PhD program or taken ethics in their lifetime. So I really thought it was important to go back to some very basic concepts, even though I still think it's a deep dive because it's not like dinner conversation usually to talk about ethical theory. Maybe it is for Peter Hagen, I don't know. But I would normally expect people to not know everything, even off the top of their head, if they took a class 20 years ago. So I will be very transparent. I started with a syllabus that I used in that course and looked at the topics that I had, took feedback from the students who, again, are all advising leaders, administrators, or coordinators of some sort, and started with that, and then went to the basics first, defining ethics, defining morals, defining values. What are the differences? And then what are some basic overarching paradigms and theories for lots of different ways of thinking and knowing? And then, towards the end of the book, we get into specific topics that affect advisors. And it's very broad leading into that. And that's building every chapter to how do people think, to what are some different ways to make decisions, and what are different examples of ethical dilemmas, to very specific things that advisors can keep in mind or that they may face towards the end of the book. So that's kind of how my approach went.
Well, I know we want everyone to get a copy and look through it, but I'm curious if you could just give us a little, an example, a little spoiler maybe of a decision-making framework or one of those paradigms from the book, and how it can help advisors navigate complex situations.
Sure, Ryan, I can do that. So the book that I used when I didn't have a book that I wrote for the past 2 times I've taught the course was Rudolf Kidder, and it's How Good People Make Tough Choices, I believe is the title. And he offered 3 ways of thinking about a decision. So those 3 ways are ends-based thinking, which reflects utilitarianism. What outcome produces the greatest number, does the greatest good for the greatest number of people? And then there's rules-based thinking, which is in deontology. Advisors have to forget about the outcomes of their decisions and focus on obeying a universal standard for all students. And care-based thinking is that an advisor be empathetic, imagining how it would feel to be the recipient of their actions rather than the decision maker. So those are the 3, I'll give an example using those 3 ways of thinking, but I also note that there's what Kidder called a trilemma, and that's kind of a compromise between all the different options. So one of my examples that I am going to share is about advising a pre-health sciences student. So any type of pre-medical or other pre-health field, and a student that you advise is struggling in a lab science course. So they're coming to you for help. They really want to pursue a career in the health sciences, but just cannot pass that first biology course. They've taken it twice. They went to tutoring and they didn't make any progress. So I'm going to apply those 3 ways of thinking. So for ends-based thinking, the advisor figures, doesn't have to be you, the advisor figures that the student may not do well a 3rd time in the class and suggests they consider a different career path. And that could be considered the greatest good for the greatest number of people, because the student may not struggle as much anymore. It could save them a lot of money and time, and it's more likely that they'll stay enrolled. If they cannot pass that first biology course, then they'll delay all their other lab courses and extend their time in college. And the advisor doesn't want them to burn out or drop out of college. So that's the ends-based thinking. If we apply rules-based thinking, the advisor might suggest the student take a course again with a different professor, reminding them that they cannot repeat it more than twice to replace the original grade. They would tell all students this because that is what's in the college's policy handbook. And they can allow the student to continue pursuing their health sciences program as long as they meet the minimum overall grades to stay in. And if the student drops below those minimum grades, then they can suggest an alternative program to pursue. And then lastly, with care-based thinking, the advisor might recommend the student consider taking biology at a nearby community college, which would be less expensive and may have a smaller class size, may not replace the Fs on their transcript or help their grade average at their institution, but it may make their journey to continue in pre-health sciences more likely. That also does take away money from the institution, but in the long run, the advisor's decision to help the student this way may retain the student.
Awesome. As you were going through each of those examples, I was like, yeah, I think I've experienced that, or have known advisors that experienced that with some of their students throughout the years. Now, going along with this book, I mean, you have various concepts in here, chapters, a lot of, I think it's probably going to be a lot of great tips for advisors, especially the ones that you've just mentioned. Have you found anything, any of these chapters or concepts particularly enjoyable that you've explored in this book, or challenging? And I guess also, like from Ashley, as your standpoint from a managing editor, do you have any favorite parts throughout this whole process, going from idea to publication?
Well, of course, I really enjoyed getting into the works of a lot of NACADA leaders before me who wrote on ethics. So I engaged with work from Mark Lowenstein, Tom Greitz, Joanne Daminger, Peter Hagen, and Drew Purway, among many others. I also had fun with Kidder's concept of ethical fitness, and I did weave in some fitness references to yoga and Pilates in the book. I also found things challenging. So I wrote a chapter on moral development theories. And yeah, that's definitely not something I would say is in my wheelhouse. So I did have to dive into those and make sense of them for me, and then try to write those in a language that I think would be digestible to people who aren't as familiar with moral development like I was when I started that. And I also think it was just a learning experience. So I live by the motto, learning never goes out of style. And so I just, thought the whole process of writing a book was a learning experience. I have co-authored a book before, and it was a very different experience than writing by myself, though we do have a lot of excellent case study contributions from NACADA members in the book. But the book process is lonely sometimes. So I just challenge myself to take it all as something I'm learning, either through the writing process or the topic.
Yeah, I think that in this particular book, Lisa does a brilliant job of with her writing. Lisa is an excellent writer to begin with, but then adding in the voices from some of the case studies that kind of help us practically think through some of those things were really a cool addition to this book. But as far as the process goes, there's so many parallels between this and advising, my job, and actually advising itself, because, when we think about students that walk into our office and think about that freshman or that non-traditional student that walks in our office and they're scared to death, right? And they don't really know, they're super excited, but they don't really know what their path is. And as an advisor, you're there to guide them along that way. And then you watch them walk across the stage as that empowered, confident, almost grown up, person that they is totally opposite of what they walked into your office with. This process is very much like that. Even Dr. Rubin had her hesitations about this process or other things that we have worked on together. And, being able to come alongside people, whether they have written a ton or whether they've never written before in their lives, and just kind of be there to empower them along the way is an incredibly humbling and rewarding experience. And I'm always there as a point person to talk with them through that process and make myself extremely accessible forever, no matter what they need. But also at the end, when they actually get to see their book or their publication in print, when they send that first proof, I remember when Lisa got the first proof of this book, and she texted me and was like, "Oh my gosh," I said, "It's really cool to see it actually, come to life, isn't it?" And then when they actually get to hold that publication for the first time, it's pretty cool. So it's a lot of fun to be a part of that process with them and just kind of be in the background and get to see everything that they experience through the process.
So I'm curious, as you're, trying to establish these basic concepts and build up to these specific situations, did you discover anything along the way that you wish there had been more room for, or that you wish there was more in scholarship that you could have drawn from to to fill in some of the questions that felt maybe unanswered?
That's a great question. I do think there is definitely more that can be added to this area in advising scholarship and generally in higher education scholarship. I was very lucky that things were coming out. Drew Peroway's article, Tensions, a Grounded Theory of Ethical Practice, came out in 2022 in NACADA Journal. So that was excellent timing. I did also find a phenomenal dissertation that I quote in the book and, harass the author a little bit to submit to a NACADA publication themselves. And so hopefully, in the future, they'll get their work promoted outside of just a small citation in this book. But there's some really potentially outstanding ideas that people can build off of. And when you do see the factors that affect ethical advising practice, which is chapter 10, it's barely covering, I covered like 5 topics a little bit, and then I list like 20 that could have been discussed. And I probably could have had a chapter on each of these topics, but just, to make it readable and not get too obsolete in the near future, I had to keep that to a minimum. But I did cover some topics I think that are really important, and in referencing, of course, one of Ryan's articles, the Panopticon article on technology and surveillance, and some of those topics that are still very relevant, like predictive analytics, some of those things that are really impacting advisors right now. And I think will continue to be important as AI still is in our conversation.
Who knows where AI will be in a few years, still here, but how advanced it'll be, we'll see. Now, I am curious, having gone through this process, a lot of writing that you've done before, and then Ashley, same for you. Let's say you have someone that's interested in wanting to write, whether it's an article, a book chapter, whatever it might be, and they're like, I don't know where to start. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah. So, to quote Dr. Wendy Troxel, your writing starts with wondering something. What do you wonder about? And she tells me that all the time. And, we all have, whether it be advising related or not, we have things that we wonder about out in the world, right? And so many advisors have imposter syndrome, right? I don't have anything important to say. I don't have anything, like I'm just doing my job. And I hear that from so many people. And my message to them is that you do have something to say. If it's something that, maybe it's something that you have found in your practice, in your day-to-day practice that works really well with students, or even one of my passions is actually the advisors themselves. How are we retaining academic advisors? How are we keeping advisors from getting burnt out when they're constantly being asked to do more and more? And so regardless of whether your focus is students or advisors or administrators, you have important things to say. And NACADA has a broad range of publication venues that they can target. And so whether it's from practice-based to integrating theory to doing research to doing a full book like Elisa did, I encourage people to reach out to me. And I'm always happy to jump on a Zoom or jump on a Teams and talk through the process and just brainstorm. Sometimes you just need somebody to bounce ideas off of, and that's what I'm here for. I love kind of that brainstorming process and helping people realize that they do have potential as an author, that they can feel empowered and confident. And then, when you do finally get the courage to write something down and submit it, that's a scary process as well. But I will say that our publications and the editors and the review teams that I have engaged in these publications are very developmental in their processes. We're not going to send your paper back with a red pen, bleeding all over the place. We're going to be even if we have to reject it for whatever reason, we're going to be very very helpful in the feedback that we give you, and it's not going to be demeaning in any way. We're very careful with the language that we use so that you do feel confident in either revising and submitting somewhere else, or revising and submitting back to us, or completely, revamping whatever it is. And what I always tell people is if you get a revise and resubmit, a lot of people take that as a rejection. It's actually not, because when you get a revise and resubmit, that means they were interested in what you wrote, and they actually want you to, and revise and resubmit is incredibly common. And I would say I can count, I've been with NACADA for 6 years now. I can count on one hand how many, I think I've had one journal article that was published right off the bat, and it was an invited piece. So, a revise and resubmit is always a good thing. And so I just encourage and empower people to realize that if you are a practitioner, if you are engaged in this profession in any way, you have something to say. So join up with the team, be bold and do it yourself, but reach out to us, and I'd love to brainstorm with you. Or reach out to our authors and have them talk through the process.
Awesome. And as we wind down with this, we've been talking about this new book. So where does one purchase this book? What's the details? How much does it cost? When's it available?
Well, I think soon you will get an email if you're a NACADA member that will invite you to pre-order the book in the month of June. And you can choose to ship it sometime in July, or you can pick it up at the annual conference at the end of October. And there will be book signings, one or more, in Las Vegas. So you can have it signed by me and case study contributors. And if you have it shipped, just remember to bring it with you to Vegas so we can sign it. But we are very excited to have this resource earlier than expected. So I thought it would be in October myself. And so the publisher has been great to work with, and everything just moved very smoothly during this process. So I definitely attribute a lot of that to working with Ashley, but I am excited to share this with our members and future members and other colleagues in adjacent fields, and hope it does make it a big difference for future scholarship on advising.
Absolutely. And now hearing, doing this interview and listening to you both, I think Ryan and I are both excited to hopefully get our hands on a copy of this and be able to read the entire thing and see you both in October in Vegas as well. So Lisa and Ashley, congrats on this upcoming book. And thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was thinking it was really nice having Lisa and Ashley on the podcast today, and just getting to talk about an author's insights and intentions when publishing a book, and the editor's perspective on the process and shepherding it through to completion. But I'm always struck by how significant and important these publications can be for academic advising as a field, as a profession. They don't happen very often, certainly not as often as we're meeting with students and going through the daily practice of being an academic advisor. So when these significant publications come out, whether it's a new edition of the NACADA Journal or the Mentor, or some other contribution to the scholarly discussions, I really think it's worth pausing and taking note of it. Back in 2013, when a book called Academic Advising Approaches was published, I remember thinking about standing in line to get my copy signed by the chapter authors and the editors, and how so many other people at the annual conference that year were going about their regular mornings, getting breakfast and looking over the sessions they were going to attend. And it seemed to me a lot like those midnight showings of the Star Wars prequel films, that these were special moments. And while ethics may not be your particular interest area when talking about the scholarship of academic advising, or how it intersects with the practice of academic advising, anytime we have a publication like this, it is important to stop and consider not only how does it move those conversations forward, what arguments does it make, what assumptions are present in the text, but also how can it inform the work that we do, both as individual advisors, but as advising communities on our campuses and in our institutions, and even much larger in our professional communities, in our regions and our states and our countries, and even internationally. So having Lisa and Ashley on the podcast today to talk about the book, it really gets me excited about these rare moments, maybe once a year, when a text is added to the shelf. And so if that's not exactly your approach to thinking about these things, it doesn't mean there isn't room for other perspectives, but I do really want to get you to think about that a little bit, about how infrequently these sorts of things happen, how rare it is for a book about the work that we do to be published. And I want to commend Lisa and Ashley in this process, and everyone who contributed to the text along the way. I know it's a lot of people who get it done. I also think, as we said in the discussion, we barely scratched the surface on the types of dilemmas advisors find themselves in. Whether it's an individual student issue and what's the maybe best or most efficacious or effective approach in working with them to look through and consider all of their options and make a good choice for them. But also on our campuses and our institutions, just the way that we influence conversations and contribute even small ways about other people's perceptions of academic advising and the contribution we make, or how we might challenge some of the perspectives and assumptions that inform practice and policy and decision-making in higher education institutions, especially these days, when the way the powers that be, as you might think of them, decision makers, policy makers, financiers, the influence they have on what it means to be an educator today. I know that there are folks out there listening who are struggling with some of those ethical perspectives that might go beyond the advising relationship, but do speak to what it means to be an educator in today's higher education place. And so I hope that the work that Lisa and others do in talking about ethical perspectives and ways to inform the perspectives we have as practitioners and as educators, how we can better support our points of view by engaging the scholarship that is part of our field. Because yes, we are going to have day-to-day, student-by-student ethical dilemmas, but we're also going to inform programming and policy and decision-making, and hopefully be a part of those larger conversations that can influence more than just one student. And I hope there are advisors who might consider what they can learn from this new book as it comes out, and how it might influence that perspective on ethics as well too. I'm really excited, obviously, about having a chance to talk about these things here on the Adventures in Advising podcast. And I hope you keep tuning in. If this is your first time listening, there's so much good stuff there in our back catalog of previous episodes. And if you're a longtime listener, thanks so much for your support. We hope to see you on the next one.